Hey everyone, it's Paddy here. Thank you so much for listening to Now We're Really Talking. Before we get into this episode, I just want to give a quick content note. In this conversation, Poppy and I talk openly about mental health, including experiences of attempted suicide and a discussion around assisted dying. Please take care while listening and step away if you need to. If anything we talk about brings up difficult feelings for you, please reach out for support. You don't have to go through it alone. In the UK, you can contact Samaritans on 116 123 or text SHOUT to 85258 for free 24/7. You can also find support at mind.org.uk. If you're listening from outside the UK, visit findahelpline.com to find local support in your country. Remember, reaching out for help is a sign of a strength, not a weakness. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Now We're Really Talking, a podcast where we deep dive into mental health stories. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Poppy, a journalist, a spoken word dabbler, and a mental health rambler, which are her words, not mine. But yeah, I'm really excited to get into all things mental health with Poppy. How are you doing?
Good. It's been a hectic week, a hectic months. The world went up and down, but that's why conversations like this are even more important. Yeah, take the time to actually talk about stuff today.
Yeah, 100%. So start off with talking about journalism. Is journalism something you wanted to do for your whole life, or has it been kind of a more recent thing?
No, I think when I was younger, as we all do, have certain ideas of what we want to be. I used to want to be a vet, but then I realised that I hate blood, hate needles, can't deal with seeing animals in pain. So that kind of quickly ruled that one out. And then I went to uni to do English, lit and drama, because I was quite torn about whether I did quite a lot of acting stuff growing up and then got into an acting school in sixth form, but couldn't afford it. And also, I think I pretty let the pressures of going to loads of like parties and stuff where people are like, oh, acting or like creative subjects, that's a nice hobby. And you're there like, actually, it's not really a hobby. It's something I feel really passionately about. I think it's really important. But I think I pretty let that get to me a bit. So then I went to do English lit and drama at uni, trying to figure out which one I wanted to do, essentially. But then COVID hit in my second year. And that meant that you couldn't really do any acting in person. So then last year kind of went towards writing a bit more, and found like, I've always loved writing, but found like a real purpose and like talking about mental health. Ends up doing a lot of spoken word, propelled by kind of how students were treated during the pandemic. And through the spoken word stuff, actually then ended up getting into writing for a student newspaper. And then, yeah, that just kind of escalated into writing more and more, writing articles. And then it ended up getting noticed by a publication. I ended up going to work for them. So yeah, it wasn't something which was necessarily on my radar until I got to uni and kind of got into it. But yeah, I somehow ended up falling into it, and it all kind of merged together in terms of spoken word. That's how it all kind of ended up in a big melting pot of working together, and that's why I got into journalism.
Yeah, that's so cool. I think that a lot of people you speak to just kind of end up falling into something. And yeah, I couldn't be a vet either because blood is just my worst kind of nightmare. And you said about talking about mental health in journalism. And obviously we see mental health a lot, probably more than ever before in journalism, but you're kind of at that kind of intersection between journalism and mental health. How do you think mental health is being portrayed in journalism? Do you think journalists can do anything differently when it comes to mental health?
It's a very good question. Yeah, I think it was really interesting because from the get-go with me getting into journalism, I guess, with when I first started writing for a student newspaper I worked for, that was because of mental health. Like my original first article was about student mental health amid the pandemic. I think if you put journalism and mental health in the same sentence, most people will be like, what? Because I think journalists sometimes get quite a bad rap for potentially not being sensitive to mental health. But I think it is kind of, there's a lot to say about it. What I think I realised coming into the industry straight out of uni was I think I learned quite quickly what my boundaries were and what I was okay with and what's not, and made maybe certain mistakes quite early on, which I'm really grateful for in terms of like understanding what I think is okay to write or what's not okay, or how to make sure that I'm always taking mental health into consideration. That's always been something which I've really tried to stick to, and never doing something which jeopardizes anyone's mental health for the sake of a click. I think it's tough though, because I think that people put a lot of responsibility or the pressure or the blame in particular onto the journalists who are doing these articles, but there's a lot which is not seen behind the scenes. So I think I kind of have a weird empathy between, I can see why people have an issue with journalists, but also as a journalist myself and having a view inside certain newsrooms or just speaking to other journalists, you kind of understand why there's become quite a toxic cycle with everything. And it's been really nice in the last couple of years to see people speaking out more about it and kind of trying to change the narrative and change how journalists portray stuff and also change how people respond to journalists. Because I think it's important to emphasize it is this toxic cycle of, if journalists aren't necessarily supported with their mental health, they're not taught how to approach things from a perspective which values and which takes into consideration other people's mental health, then they are then going to produce content which could then jeopardize other people's mental health. And then they get blamed for that, and then their mental health get impacted again. And then it goes, the whole cycle goes, repeats and repeats and repeats. And actually, kind of like with everything, education and awareness and understanding comes into it a lot. And I think that's what needs to happen more. And it's something I'm very hyper aware of. And I've got kind of a few things which I've had planned for a couple of years, which hopefully maybe if I come back on the podcast a different time, I'll be able to tell you more about. I don't want to say too much too soon, but it's something I'm very acutely aware of. And as in my position as a journalist and the kind of experiences I've had, I'm looking to really try and, through a couple of things I've got in the works, to try and really tackle that, because I do think it's kind of cyclical nature and it's something we all need to help each other with. Because as much as it's easy to point the blame and go, oh, but the journalist is one writing it, what people don't understand is sometimes the journalist writing the article won't have any say over the headline. A lot of the times the headline is formulated by editors or by a publication because it's made to be more clickbait. And then people blame the journalist who's writing the article, not realizing actually they're not the ones who do the headline. And that's not to say that there isn't some blame in terms of they work for that publication in the first place and they could try and say no, but sometimes they do say no and they probably then aren't allowed and don't have the power or authority in that position. And like in many industries, I think all of us know that a lot of industries are very competitive, and it's easier said than done to say that you have this certain moral compass and moral high ground and you're going to stick to it when you're trying to get a name for yourself or become successful or do what you want to do or love to do. And there are certain things that you may have to bend. I'm not saying it's okay to completely get rid of them completely, but sometimes it is a luxury to be able to not have to necessarily do the hard and the work you don't always want to do to be able to get to the place you don't want to be in. And that's not ever saying that you should jeopardize someone else's mental health, but people make mistakes and they don't realize that until later on. If people keep doing it, okay, sure. And if it becomes a pattern of behavior, but if people mess up once or twice and then get taught a lesson, I think there should be a bit more forgiveness in terms of awareness of what everyone's going through in that moment, and like not just pointing the finger and actually then making the problem worse, because the more you point the finger and the more you push the blame on someone, the more their mental health's going to suffer and then the cycle continues.
Yeah.
That's a very long-winded way of saying that it's difficult. But I think it's not just a thing with journalism and mental health. I think it's a thing with every single industry and people navigating things, especially at a younger age and getting into industries and being quite early on in whatever industry you're in.
I have never really thought of it too much about, I see when you read about redundancies and that kind of thing, that the impact of that on mental health and the more and more pressure to write stories and to get clicks. And if you always wanted to be a journalist or you love being a journalist, that pressure is really, really real. Yeah, it's something that I've not thought about. So do you think that your mental health and your experiences with your own mental health makes you a better journalist?
Yeah, I think it makes me more aware of everyone else's, and I'm quite stubborn as a person. Yeah, I think you have to have awareness of anything to be able to empathize with that and to be able to kind of know your moral boundaries and compass. And if you don't have the lived experience yourself, you have to then be able to listen to other people and like be open to their experiences. And I think I have gone through quite a lot in my life where I'm able to empathize, or I think to some extent when I first started journalism, I was probably too much the other way. Like I was too much of a people pleaser in terms of I was so hyper aware of, like, if I interview someone, making sure that exactly their words were on the page, exactly how they said them, and making sure I couldn't touch anything they said or cut anything they'd said, because it had to be, I didn't feel like I had the right And I never edit what someone was saying, but in terms of just like, you can't have an article which is like 5,000 words long. You have to take the best bits or the kind of most important bits and kind of get them in there. Otherwise, actually, you're doing a detriment to the article and their story, because no one's going to read a 5,000 word article. So it's, I think, about the balance of, respecting someone and their mental health, but also knowing that as your job as a journalist is to help someone tell the story and tell their story and spread awareness. You sometimes have to boil it down an hour-long interview into, it's like podcasts, I guess, in a kind of similar way sometimes, even though podcast maybe you can do a bit longer. I think you have to weigh up how to help facilitate and elevate someone's voice without, and it's a difficult balance, but without them taking away from it. And it's not the pressure and responsibility, but I think it's just practice. It's trusting in yourself, and also just knowing as long as you respect the person and you try and represent it as much as possible, represent them fairly and do it for the right reasons. And I think that's, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, fundamentally, if you can look at yourself and whatever you do, I think, and know that in your heart of hearts, you're not doing it for a click. You're not doing it for whatever. And if it comes to a point where you are, and that's getting in the way, I think you have to kind of question why, if you're doing what you love anymore, if it's worth it. Because I don't think any job or anything is worth you breaking your morals as a person. And that's really tough. And that's a luxury, because sometimes I can see why people would then turn around and be like, that's such a luxury, because you sometimes do have to do that. But I don't know. It's up to everyone has their own boundaries. But I just think for me, what I've always turned around to and question myself within is why I'm doing something, if I'm doing it for the right reasons. And as long as it's that, I don't think you can kind of ever go wrong. And then it gives yourself more trust in yourself as well.
I think that's so key. I always think that if you never lose the why, then you can't really go too far wrong, especially in like charities, anything really. If you remember why you're doing it, then you know that, and that stays consistent, then I think you've always got that to fall back on. So you talked about when you got into journalism and started writing for a student newspaper during COVID, and your first article was about mental health. Had you struggled with your mental health up until COVID, or was it something new during lockdown?
Yes, I think my mum struggled a lot with her mental health. And I also struggled a lot growing up with someone, she's a single parent, and I'm an only child. And growing up with someone who struggles so much with their mental health, but doesn't have a really understanding of exactly how they're struggling or what to do to help themselves, and kind of continuously, unfortunately, kind of has certain vices which makes it worse, then does impact that child, because not only are you then navigating your own struggles of being a teenager and not knowing what's going on with your life and trying to adapt to school, bullying, to the exam pressure, to all these things which you've got in your mind when you're a teenager and growing up. But you're also then having to navigate a parental relationship where you don't really you're having to be the parent. And you're have to navigate their mental health and figure out what they're going through, and trying to understand them, also trying to grapple with your own understanding of your brain and your body and how you work. And I think seeing someone so close to me really struggle with their mental health made me really hyper aware of my own. And I mean, looking back now, I look back at myself when I'm 16 and stuff, and I feel so distant. I feel like I've evolved through 4, 5, 6 different versions of myself since I was younger, because I do think I now look back and I'm trying, and in therapy myself, trying to have more empathy with myself about why I have behaved in certain ways, and not punishing myself for acting out in certain ways, whatever, because I was ultimately a kid. But I think I have always really struggled, but I've always been quite proactive in tackling it. And I've been really fortunate to have access to therapy services and free therapy services, whether it be through school or through uni, because I've seen what it can do not tackling it. And rather than, I don't know, I've seen my mum suffer with it so much, and it be, as much as she has so many amazing qualities about her, I've kind of said to myself, I don't want to let her get to the stage where I am 40-something years old, 50-something years old, and still struggling to the degree she has, and it impacts not only myself still, but my relationship with others and my daughter or son or whatever I go on to have. And I've always felt this massive sense of responsibility to kind of change that, I guess, generational kind of trauma path of not speaking about mental health. And I've seen how destructive it can be. So yeah, I have struggled with my mental health partly because of just my relationship with my mum, partly because, I don't think we're taught, if you're not taught a good way to kind of deal with your own mental health by a parent or by schools, and I guess, I don't know, I'm 25 and I still feel like the first time I heard the word or term mental health was when I was probably like 18 or 19, which is wild. I feel like everyone's talking about it these days. It's huge. Everyone's talking about it. But it just wasn't really spoken about that much. And that feels wild to say that I was born in 2000 and still it wasn't really spoken about when I was growing up. I struggled. Yeah, really struggled with my mental health. And it's been something which I've been having therapy since the age of around 10 years old for different aspects of my mental health. But when I went to uni, it was a massive escape for me because I got to move away from my mum and kind of find my sense of self and my sense of identity. And I got to kind of take away one part which was massively triggering my mental health. But that didn't take away the full problem. Like I still dealt with anxiety and depression. I ended up going on antidepressants in my second year when I just couldn't leave the house because COVID as well, I think massively exacerbated that. So I feel like even though I was taking out my mum out of the equation, you can never really run. It's like when people say, oh, you go on holiday and you think you're escaping your problems, but you still take yourself on holiday with you. One of my best friends said that to me the other day. So I think COVID just highlighted already existing aspects of my mental health, but it just exacerbated them and made them a lot worse and harder to ignore. And that's when I kind of found that spoken word was the first time I wrote spoken word, and then I ended up writing an article, and actually writing about it really helped me process it. And that's kind of what I do in all my work, whether it's or what I love to anyway. Spoken word, this is how I fully approach it, but journalism, this is what I want to get back to more is, and I normally speak about my mental health or write about it in a way to help process it myself. So it's quite selfish in that aspect in terms of like it's a kind of like a diary thing. And then the reason I then publish it or put it online, and then I actually did a podcast in uni called The Substitute Therapists, because there weren't enough therapists basically to go around. Not saying I'm a therapist at all, but I was like, maybe if I share my experiences, someone will just feel less alone. Fundamentally, I think a lot of the work I believe that if you do work on your mental health, it should be for you. Like, ultimately, anything you do with your mental health has to be for yourself, because I don't think then if you do it for someone else, it's kind of superficial and it's surface level. You have to, the only way you're going to dig deep is if you do it for yourself. But then the reason I share it, I guess, is to mainly for my anxiety, because sharing it confronts it even more and makes it real. Like posting stuff on social media when I first started doing that terrified me. But actually, going back to kind of what we were saying earlier, if I know that I'm doing it for me and for the right reasons, and because if potentially someone else finds solace in it or feels less alone, then that's a massive added bonus. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, yes, I have struggled with health, and here's what I do to sometimes help it.
No, it's so important. I think where you talk about spoken word, it's not selfish at all, because actually I think it helps people more if you do it for yourself and you're talking from your own experiences and it helps you, then that's going to help people, rather than if you're doing it for the other reasons. And I totally agree when you say that at the end of the day you've got to be doing the things for your own mental health rather than for anybody else, because that's, if you feel like you're doing it for somebody else, I don't know, when I've felt like I've been doing things for other people, I've not got a lot out of it because I'm not doing it for the right reasons. You talked about therapy starting off from 11. Could you understand at that point what therapy was? I know even now, like, therapy is difficult. I see like my therapist every week, and some sessions I come out of and I'm so tired. I can't imagine doing that at 11. How did you find it at that kind of young age?
It looks very different to how it looks now. So when I was like 10 or 11, she would get me to arrange, she knew I was a bit of an arty kid. And she'd buy me sweets, or like sit me down when she was chatting to my mum, she'd let me watch her Sky TV, which I thought was great because we couldn't afford Sky. So I was like, brilliant. I'll come here every week. That's fine. But when we were in the actual therapy session part of it, she'd like make me line up spray can bottles from my favorite color to my least favorite color, and she'd have this like wall of paper and she'd ask me questions, then I'd spray it. So like kids therapy is obviously different. I wish I could still do that now.
Yeah, it does sound good.
Listening, just take notes, send me sweets, let me spray paint walls. I do remember that approach worked really well then, because it was like a more of an indirect way of me, it wasn't as confronting, I guess. And like, you don't understand your own mental health when you're 10 or 11 years old. It was like an easier way of kind of getting to the issue of certain things. But then on the topic of therapists, like I say that worked then, but then when I was like 14, 15, I remember another therapist sat me down to like draw something and just gave me a pen and a piece of paper, and I just burst into tears after 10 minutes because I was like, what do you want me to draw? Like, what if I draw the wrong thing? What if I draw something and this is this about me? What? And then you just completely, because my brain was different when I was 10 or 11. Don't think as much as a kid. Whereas 14, 15, I was in the anxious stage where I was overthinking everything and I was overanalyzing everything, and it just descended me into this spiral. And I think different therapists have offered me different things. I will say that I think therapy is incredible, and I think everyone should. Obviously, I know that we don't all have access to it, and there's a massive mental health crisis. Sometimes we don't have enough therapists to go around, and or there's not enough funding into mental health, which massively needs to be changed. If the world was a better place than it is now, I fundamentally believe every single person, even if they haven't had, and I'm using quotation marks on my fingers, trauma in their life, should have therapy. I think everyone, no matter what you've been through, no matter where you've come from, has something they can unpack with therapy. And it's so important to have access to that, but also that it's really tough because you can have therapists which make it worse. And I've had, I want to say around 8 therapists. And I would say that for different things, for different reasons, at different points in my life, but I would say some have made my situation feel worse or made me feel less understood. And this isn't meant to be a like warning anyone of therapy. I just think it's really important. Like anyone, like everyone has different brains, everyone has different ways of thinking. It's really important to find someone who's compatible to you. And I've heard that there are some online services which are great because if you don't necessarily gel with the first therapist you get matched with, you can change. And it's kind of like speed dating or dating, but with therapists, that you just do need to find someone who kind of understands your brain and way of thinking, or can offer you certain tactics or way of looking at things which work with your psychology. So yeah, I would definitely say that that's something which I think is really important, is like making sure you don't give up after meeting with one therapist and going, oh, well, they weren't the right fit, I didn't feel understood, because there's going to be someone else out there who will. It's just sometimes a case of like Goldilocks and 3 bears, finding which porridge is the right fit, the right temperature.
Yeah, I think that is important. And I think it's part of the education around the fact that people often have a therapy session or a few, and then they don't gel, and then they think that no therapy is for them. But actually it's important to kind of to know if you're going into therapy for the first time, just because you don't gel with one therapist, it's not a one size fits all. You may work with somebody else, and I'm lucky I've had a therapist, but I know that other types of therapy just wouldn't work for me. And it's important to kind of not give up after that first one. Yeah, at uni, were you first year or second year when COVID hit?
Through my second year. I think it was just before Easter holidays. Everyone was like, oh, we'll see you when you're back. It would blow over this like little flu thing that everyone's suddenly talking about. And then 2 weeks turned to, a lot longer.
I remember at school, and we all thought it was going to be like 2 weeks before Easter, and then Easter, and then we'd be back. But I think university students were dealt with like so badly. And I think that's kind of being recognised now. How did the actual COVID and the lockdowns impact your mental health?
So really badly. The article I ended up writing for the student newspaper was essentially saying, I think it's still online somewhere, it was essentially saying that I had thoughts about not wanting to be here anymore. And when I was younger, when I was like 16, I had attempted to take my own life. And I think during uni, what ended up really being highlighted was just the feeling of isolation and the lack of support, being completely away from home, which sounds weird considering I've just said that actually being away from my mum was probably healthy for a relationship, but it still, I think, emphasised that everyone else was going back to their homes and had families as a support in whatever way that was. I lived with flatmates who had varying degrees of different attitudes towards COVID and what was okay, what was not okay. I mean, we were all adapting to a circumstance none of us had ever been through before. And you've got people who are obviously health anxious, or people who you get along with more than others, and everyone's mental health suffering, and no one's behaving in a way which they probably ideally would be, because everyone's under such stress. And so just the fact of being isolated in my room, and I got COVID pretty badly, and couldn't really move out of my bed, like nearly considered calling an ambulance because I physically was just couldn't move and my whole body was aching. Um, yeah, I just felt massively isolated. And I think I just felt alone. And I think whether it's COVID or not, I think feeling alone and feeling isolated or feeling like no one else gets what you're going through um, can be when, or at least personally, is when I kind of slip into bad patterns or with my mental health or feel kind of a bit more hopeless. So that's, I think, the space I kind of got to. But then actually writing about it and publishing an article which literally had a picture of me crying in it and saying that I just did lose hope in the thought, like I did have thoughts of not being able to cope with being here anymore. But I think what I didn't realize is I didn't want to stop living. I just sort of didn't want to keep living the life I was. And I know that so many people could say, oh, but so many aspects of that are out of your control, or like it's not in my control. And I get that. But I think even if you just hold on enough to kind of get you through the worst bit, even if it's like by a thread of cotton wool you're like hanging on by, knowing that something might change. And there's like, I did a piece of spoken word, which I ended up performing, and rather long, it's like 10 minutes long. Basically just saying how even if you just, what I realized was that I didn't want to keep living the life I was living, but it didn't mean that I had to give up on life completely. And I could never rule out in my whole rest of the years that I hopefully live, I can't rule out being smiling again at something as small as, I don't know, a waitress like smiling at me when I thank her for the menu, or one of my friends at work like opening for the mental health a bit. Like there's all these moments of connection which you can't rule out you'll feel, no matter how depressed and anxious I felt. I couldn't rule out that in the whole rest of my life there wasn't going to be a moment where I felt a bit better. And even if I just clutch onto that moment of hope, that could get me through enough to then be able to speak to someone or reach out or write this article, which then had loads of other people speaking out. And then you realize you're less alone than you think you are. But people are still so scared to speak out, I think, and be vulnerable, which I completely get. Actually, if more people did that, it could give other people a bit more hope to understand that they're not alone, and that more people feel like that, then they realise, and not everyone's not this picture perfect version of who they post themselves to be online or anything like that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's so important. And how did you feel when you press submit on the article? Because you were kind of opening yourself up to, did other people know at the time how you felt, or was it something you kept quite closed off?
I don't think I'm normally quite honest with my mates about not feeling the best. I think I do struggle still to this day to reach out for help. And actually, weirdly, I think I pretty find it easier to write stuff down and post and then forget about it. Then sometimes I do turn around and be like, actually, I'm not okay right now. But that's, I think, something everyone has stuff to work on. And that's something I'm just learning to get better at. I feel like sometimes I feel the burden still on my friends, or people have their own problems in their own lives. And it makes me think, why would I share mine? But then you've got to put yourself in the perspective of, but every time my friend opens up to me, selfishly, it's a massive privilege to have someone open up to you and to be able to come to you and ask for your help or advice or an ear or a hug. So then I guess you have to put yourself in perspective. Would I tell my friend that? Or would I say that to my friends? It's always harsher on ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And let's talk about the spoken word, because I've been watching your videos and they're so good. I think that they're so powerful, and I don't have a poetic or artistic brain, but I think that spoken word and poetry has a way of expressing emotions and feelings that prose and writing on a piece of paper can never kind of accomplish. How did you get into spoken word? Was it from, I think you said at uni? And did you get into spoken word just to write it, or did you always want to perform it and kind of use it to help other people?
So I got into spoken word at uni. And I think the first piece I ever wrote was a piece titled Dear 2020. So it basically dealt with, it's a very feisty piece. I look back on it now and I'm like, wow, I had a lot more guts than I do now. Basically addressing kind of 2020, the university and government's approach to COVID and students, and kind of just addressing the state of the world and how at the time we were all saying how much has changed, but has it really? And like, we need to do so much more work and how ironic certain things were, like people capping for carers in the NHS, but then the government not funding it properly, and all of these contradictions, and go eat out to help out, but actually then we're going to blame students for being the ones to pass on with the coronavirus. So I did that. And I think started spoken word because I felt compelled to speak. So this Dear 2021 was because I was angry. And I guess I think some of my best work comes from feeling quite intense emotions. This is the first couple I wrote, like Dear 2020. Then there was one about walking as a woman, which was after Sarah Everard, and kind of speaking about, the safety of walking as women, and the fact that we're, again, in this year in time, and still women can't go outside without being terrified that they're going to be able to get home safe. Then I also wrote this one about attempted suicide, and kind of speaking out how, and I've not actually ever published this one online, but it's something that I would really like to do eventually, because I know there's like there are World Mental Health Days, and there's, I think, Suicide Prevention Day, but there's not one which deals with attempted suicide. And I think that, if anything, attempted suicide can be even more stigmatized than suicide itself, because I remember, I think when I did try to end my own life, and kind of some of the comments were like, oh, well, you clearly didn't try hard enough then. And it's like, how warped are we as a society to turn around and tell someone who is in such a state of upset and depression and loss of hope, that your first thing, rather than being like, thank goodness it didn't work as in like it didn't happen how you initially wanted it to. Thank goodness it didn't, rather than saying thank goodness it didn't happen that way, you go, oh, well, clearly you didn't try hard enough then. And I think that like emphasizes so much how much is wrong with the world, because people just still can't talk about it, and they still get so squirmish, and rather than trying to help that person, they just make a comment which completely devalues that person's life and what it means to have them alive still. So I think I then did that spoken word to kind of try and address why it's still so stigmatized and why people need to speak out about it. And then that's basically why, very rambly way of speaking, I went on a massive tangent, way of saying how I started spoken word, because I felt really compelled to speak about things. I felt really angry, upset, pissed off, and used it as a way to it was a way to channel my emotions and try and formulate it in make some sort of sense out of it for myself, but also kind of spread awareness about it in as powerful way as possible. And then the second half of your question was?
So did you start writing and getting spoken word knowing you wanted to perform?
I think because with spoken word, what differs, I know some spoken word poetry artists know a lot about spoken word poetry and have done a lot about the history and have gone into it massively. I didn't really have any knowledge of what it was when I first started writing. Like, I wrote it from this place of passion, this place of anger, upset, the need and feeling compelled to say something. So I hadn't really, it's not like I saw some people online doing it. I don't think I'd ever seen anyone perform a piece of spoken word before at all. So it wasn't like I had any basis to go off. I kind of just felt these things, wrote them down, was like, I need to say something. I feel like this can make it, this is important to say. And if it resonates with anyone, great. But if not, it kind of helps me process my stuff. So I think, I always, when I wrote it, I was like, well, it might not work with someone else saying it, because these are kind of my thoughts. You know, when you write stuff down and it kind of only works with your intonations or like how you say stuff, your rhythm or your vocal quality or whatever like that. So I think if someone looked at some of the stuff I wrote earlier, they'd be like, this is not poetry. This is so chaotic and it doesn't make sense on the page. So it didn't really make sense on the page for me. It kind of made sense like in my brain, me speaking it. So no, I've never actually thought about anyone else performing my work. I think I'd have to get better at writing, which sounds weird because like I'm a journalist and I get paid to write. But I think poetry wise, it's always been like I'm normally a perfectionist in so many areas of my life, but with that, it's never been that I've studied poetry and I want to like be good at creating and curating this spoken word poetry. It's more being like compelled by emotion to say something, and it doesn't really matter if some of the rhymes don't work. It doesn't really matter if I don't get it, all the rhythms right or whatever. It just matters that it's said or the emotion. I'm probably quite emotion driven when I write spoken word, whereas when I write articles, I'm a lot more like trying to make sure everything's right and everything is effective and everything's fair and everything is very cautiously done, whereas spoken word's always been my outlet for emotion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you can definitely tell because of the things that kind of on the Instagram about kind of body image, mental health, sexual abuse. Are these all things that do you draw from your own experiences? And is it kind of a way for you, a cathartic kind of mechanism to use what's happened as a positive or to get something positive out of it?
Yeah, I think everyone has a different. I have so much respect for artists and for writers and for anyone who writes who has an imaginative brain to be able to make up certain stories or characters or situations. I don't know if I can't do it. I think I haven't done it in so long. I guess when my kids were taught that creative writing is really important and we do it all the time, and we have creating writing sessions and you get your purple book and you get to like graduate to using a pen rather than just a pencil and like write all these things. But then as you're older and older and as you get more anxious and life just gets a lot, you probably lose that creative side of you. And I think I'd love to engage with that creative side again. But I think a lot of what I do does rely on personal experiences, and I feel almost more comfortable or have ground myself in speaking about personal experience and trying to be braver at doing that and trying to use it as a way to process my own trauma and my own experiences. But also then if someone does feel less alone through it, then that's amazing as well. Yeah, I think most of my stuff is grounded in personal experience or speaking from a place of truth. I'm not so good at actually creating characters or creating stories and using that as a way to still like put in emotion and stuff. But I have so much respect for people who do, and I wish I could. And maybe I will later in life unlock that part of my brain again.
Yeah, I have so much respect for anybody who can so eloquently put their feelings and thoughts into poetry, because that's just not where my skills are. But we met through charity Words Matter, and we're doing a parliamentary event for that. I think actually before maybe the week that this goes out. How did you get involved, and what is Words Matter, and how did you get involved?
So Words Matter is an incredible charity which is campaigning for raising awareness about the verbal abuse specifically of children. A lot of the research and kind of campaigning they've done so far is basically proving or highlighting how verbal abuse of kids can be just as, if not more, damaging to a kid's mental health and following them later into adulthood than physical abuse and different types of abuse along the way. I first got involved with Words Matter and their incredible founder, Jess Bondy, during my journalism, and ended up interviewing Jess for an article. I think it was on World Mental Health Day, actually. And it was about the statistics where I think a study has shown that verbal abuse for kids can be the same, if not more so, damaging than different types of other abuse of kids. And I interviewed Jess, and during the interview just said how much I personally relate to the charity and the organisation's message and its campaigning through my own personal experiences, and so would really love to get involved outside of my journalism or in any sort of other capacity I can. And then from then on, me and Jess have just stayed in touch a lot, which has been lovely. And yeah, I noticed they did a piece of poetry. And as soon as they did that, I emailed Jess being like, oh my goodness, I do poetry too. Well, if you can call it poetry. But I do some spoken word stuff too. And I'd love to like do more and I have all these ideas. And if you're happy on board, I want to do more or as much as I can. So yeah, I think as I said earlier, like seeing my mum go through so many things with her mental health and not have access to support or be able to personally deal with it in a way which could have changed some of the things which happened to her, which she went through, which then happened to me. I think I've massively kind of made it my mission and made it quite a big decision early on in my life that I always wanted to be as open and honest as possible about my mental health, because I've seen how detrimental it can be not to be to that individual, but also to everyone around you. So as soon as I chatted with Jess, I was like, I'd love to help. If my experiences and opening up about them can make any other kid feel less alone or just help campaign for change and make people really take it seriously, then I'd love to do that.
It's amazing. And what Jess is doing and Words Matter is incredible. It's really horrifying seeing some of the statistics. I don't think you realise until you see some of them, the kind of scale of the issue. Do you find it difficult talking about kind of your relationship with other people and how that's affected you and their mental health?
I think it's really difficult when I think I find it more challenging speaking about my relationship with other people and their mental health, or my both for mental health in that sense. Because when you speak about yourself, you're kind of only putting yourself in a vulnerable position. And it's difficult because you want to respect everyone else's mental health and journeys as well. I think one of the main reasons I'm getting more involved with Words Matter now is because my mum passed away in August this year. So I think it's weird because you want to respect someone's journey and not say too much about their thing because it's not your place to say. But also, I think with your parents, it's really difficult because intrinsically it becomes your story. It's not just her story and her trauma anymore. It is mine. I think there's a way of navigating that, and I'm not always going to get it right, and I'll try my best to. But I think when it comes to, it's about the balance, isn't it? I think it's wanting to do the right thing for you. It's like we had our funeral on Tuesday this week, and I remember when we went to see the Reverend for her service to take place, he was like, "So what do you want to get out of the funeral?" And I said, "Oh, well, I just want my mum to have the service that she wanted to have." He was like, "No, but what do you want?" And I think that was it really struck me, that question, because I hadn't really thought about what I wanted out of it. I'd always just thought it's what she wants, it's what she needs, this is what she would have wanted. And I think it's kind of the same in terms of trauma. Like, you have to respect someone and their wishes, but also know that it's your story as well. And you have to do what's best for you. And you can do that with a certain air of respect and grace for that person. But ultimately, it's your life, and you can't blame your trauma on other people. I couldn't spend the rest of my life messing up or behaving badly and go, "Oh, but it's not my fault because I got X, Y, Z as a kid. Like, this happened to me as a kid, so this is like acceptable behavior now because it wasn't my fault. It happened to me as a kid. So if I act out now, that's not my fault." Like, there's only so many times people are going to be like, "Oh, poor you for like what happened to you as a kid." Like, if you act out and you do things in your life which aren't okay, or which then impact other people, you treat other people badly, you can't just turn around and go, "Oh, it's my parents' fault because they did this when I was growing up." So I think it's just taking accountability for yourself, and taking accountability for your own trauma. And I think within that, then you're allowed to speak about it to a certain extent. Well, I hope I'm doing it with an air of respect and understanding towards my mum, and sympathy and empathy for the fact that, I think forgiveness is a massive part of it, and understanding that you can speak about someone else and someone else can have had an impact on their mental health, but that's probably says a lot more about their mental health than their state or what they were taught. And kind of a way to get over that and to process it is to take accountability for how you act off the back of that, delve into it. I think that's always been my thing. When I first started with my most recent therapist, my first session, I said that when he said what I wanted to achieve out of the session, I said that I wanted to make sure my past doesn't impact my future. And I think, it's taking, I do find it hard to talk about stuff with my mum, but I think it's important that you do, because otherwise things won't change unless you talk about it. And you can do it with a certain level of respect or awareness. But I think it's you should never not talk about something. I think it's just how you do it, or find a space to do it. And like, there are certain things I say to you on the score, which I'm not like, and certain things which I say to my friends. There are certain different groups of people you're going to say things to in very different ways. And certain things I'll say to my therapist, which I probably won't share with anyone else in the world. But I think it's always important to talk about it, even if it's a bit more difficult. And even if you don't always get it right, there's probably things I'm going to look back on in this conversation and be like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that quite like that." But that's okay, because we're all figuring it out.
Yeah, it's really, really powerful. And I think, not something I've not really thought about in that way before. And I agree, it's so difficult. I think when you talk about other people's mental health, that inevitably impacts you, but there's that kind of disconnect. I know that when I'm talking about my own mental health, at the end of the day, it's just me, and I'm going to be the only one to suffer if I share something that I don't want shared. But, I think when you're talking to somebody else or talking on somebody else's experiences, it is important, but it's doing it in a way that isn't to a detriment to them. So, I think that's, so powerful. Kind of looking ahead, we have the parliamentary event. What else do you? I know you said earlier about some things in the making, but in terms of spoken word or campaigning, what would you love to kind of look back in 10 years' time and say, I've been able to do that and I've achieved this?
That's such a good question. So there's a thing which I mentioned earlier, which I'm not going to mention more of because I'm the sort of person where I'm the sort of person who I don't massively like, which is weird that I come on your podcast because I am normally the person who likes asking the questions and not answering them and like listening to people rather than saying my own stuff. So I think I'm kind of hyper conscious and it's kind of the same successes or things which I hope or my dreams or kind of goals. I like kind of waiting until I know they're maybe certain or something's going to kind of happen out of them rather than kind of saying it and then it doesn't happen and then I see it as a failure, which maybe is not the best way to look at it. So maybe I just need to start manifesting it. But there's that, which is more towards like mental health of journalists, which is something which I'm working on, which I think is really important.
So exciting.
Hopefully, yeah, I've got lots of plans for it. It's been kind of in the works for the last like 3 to 4 years, but just because of my mum's situation and looking after her, has all been a bit set back. But I'm hoping that next year will be the year it all kind of takes off. And hopefully it will do some good for journalists and for people who have felt they've been unfairly treated by journalists. Hopefully it will help everyone in the equation. But something I can talk about, hopefully, sort of ish, I think I can talk about it, is I did a piece of spoken word on, so my mum had pancreatic cancer and ended up in a hospice and had the most amazing experience in the hospice and was treated absolutely incredibly. But unfortunately, I mean, she was kind of ready to go. She had like a really long 3-year battle and had done absolutely incredibly. But the way she ended up passing away in the last 2 days of me being with her were quite traumatic to have to see. So I did this piece of spoken words, which I performed at something called Spit Night, which is an amazing spoken words group who have started up this a while ago now. And they've got the most, if you haven't seen them, you should check them out. They're amazing. And they champion some really amazing up-and-coming voices and people who've been around for a while in kind of the spoken word community, and just have the most incredible nights and supportive communities. And I did this piece of spoken word about assisted dying and why I think it's kind of, they're in talks at the moment. It's been massively debated. And hopefully things will be quite good for it. But I did a piece of spoken word kind of about my experiences with my mum to try and raise awareness from it, especially from kind of like a youngish person's perspective. And I sent it around to kind of some assisted dying charities and try and help raise awareness. And hopefully, I think one of them is potentially meant to be posting a snippet. So if anyone wants to go check that out, it should be on one of them soon. I will hopefully be able to get back in touch with you about that. So that's hopefully coming out. And it's quite nice to be doing stuff again for writing spoken word again, because I feel compelled to write. Obviously, it's not a nice subject and I wish I wasn't having to write about it. But I think within social media sometimes, especially sometimes with spoken word stuff and more creative stuff, it becomes, social media is such an incredible way to share experiences and share creative projects or talks or your work or music or whatever it is. But it's also quite difficult navigating social media in terms of everything has to be 40 seconds. You have to keep everyone engaged. It has to be kind of a certain length for a certain time or condensed, or you kind of have to adapt your creativity in order to try and fit the mold slightly and try in order for it to be able to spread awareness as far as possible. And I think of late on social media, I've been writing more about kind of love, and I think this is the same with every industry in journalism at the moment as well. I think it's harder to write stuff on mental health because outlets are having to raise funds and get statistics, and people don't naturally really want to read about mental health still because it's still a bit of a contentious topic, and people don't want to sit on their phones and escape by reading about mental health and anxiety and depression because that's normally what they're trying to escape from. And I think it's the same with social media as well. Sometimes you have to kind of change what you do on social media or adapt to the times, and it's not necessarily what you always want to speak about, but it's a means to an end with like, oh, well, people like talking about love and hearing about what real love is. And on TikTok, I think the best video I've done is about real love. And I'm saying I still enjoyed writing it and I still talking about love. And I still think it's great to talk about. But would I much rather probably talk about stuff to raise awareness of like mental health or assisted dying? Yes. So it's nice that I get to share that with that charity. and help raise some awareness. And it was kind of nice being able to reignite my passion for writing because I felt compelled to write and raise awareness about something which is way more important than, I want to say love, but that's kind of controversial. Love's really important, but there are other things in the world which I think it's good to talk about. So that's kind of coming up. And I think there's something else coming up in my life. I think I'm just excited. I have taken a step back from, because of everything that's happened with my mom and the kind of the last 3 years of my life, looking after her and then her passing away. I'm kind of taking a step back from, I've been in the job that I've been in at the moment for the last 4.5 years of my life. It was straight out of uni and it's been the most incredible experience. And it was really gutting to decide to have to take a step back, but just with my mental health at the moment, and navigating this period of loss, I've kind of told myself that I just need to take a step back from and reevaluate everything. Like, I'm 25 years old. And this is completely, the last 3 years have been completely shaped by my mum being sick and me being, she's my only parent, so being there to support her. And I think it was a really tough decision to turn around and say actually to my work that I need to fully step back, because it's something, no one likes change. And I've been through so much change with my mom and change in my life that it seems weird taking a step back from my job and causing myself even more change. But actually I feel like it's kind of a step I need to do in order to reflect on what I'm doing and give myself a bit of a breather and kind of figure out what I'm doing and what matters to me at this moment in time. And I think, as awful as it's been losing my mom and how much I wish I could change that, it's really made me think and question things in a way which maybe not losing someone wouldn't, like if I hadn't lost someone, I wouldn't have been able to. I'm trying to, give myself the grace and give myself the space to be able to say that that's okay. And like, just take a step back and think about what I want to do, where I'm going to put the energy and my time in, and trying to find that never-ending struggle for the work-to-life balance, which we never achieve, but it's always nice to dream about. And actually do things like going into Parliament with Words Matter and doing that spoken word about a sister dying, and kind of finding my sense of what's therapeutic for me, again, and kind of wiping the slate clean in a way to be able to then build myself back up and build my life back together with it again, which is sometimes, even though it's really scary to literally strip everything back to zero, sometimes I think you need to do, rather than being scared of it, be excited for what changes it could bring.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. And sometimes taking a step back, it's the right thing to do, but it's such a hard and kind of courageous decision to do, and actually to do that. So yeah, that's really incredible. Just finally, my final question, which I like to ask everyone: if you could go back to like Poppy 10, 15 years ago, what do you think you'd say to her? What advice would you give her?
It's great. Going right into the eye of the storm 10 years ago. I'd probably say just repeat what I said earlier, which is just whenever I have really dark times at the moment, or whenever, I kind of do go back to this piece of spoken word that I wrote about attempted suicide, and I do read it to myself. And that sounds like I'm just amping up my own work massively, and it's not. But I think it's quite therapeutic going back to whether it's you've written diaries or things you've been through, and seeing, as much as you can see other people online say how they've got through certain things, they're not you. And what I found quite therapeutic at the moment is going back to things I've written, or whether it's a diary entry or whether it's spoken word, and seeing that even when I've reached the lowest points in my whole life and thought I'd never come back from that I've gotten through those. And if I've done it before, you can do it again. And in that spoken word, I say, and what I said earlier, is that I think there's a line in it, which is where I say, I'm going to have to get it off to say it, because I actually quite like it. Not to toot my own horn or my own work, just because I'm going to butcher it unless I get it off. Apologies. So the last paragraph of it is, so while it may seem distant, almost unreachable, even near impossible today, like film and television, which is developed from just being shades of grey, you may be stuck in Kansas, but it's guaranteed you'll always be able to find some moments of Oz too. Life is never a rainbow, but I promise it won't always be shades of blue. And I think I just quite liked that, because I'm not saying that your life is going to be amazing and a rainbow all the time, but it won't just be like, even if it's not blue and it has bits of yellow and it's like you're aiming for red or green, but like it doesn't always happen like that. you can't ever rule out the possibility of being able to smile again. So I think that's what I said to myself when I was 15 and 16. And then that's what I do say. This is what I kind of tell my younger self without being really cheesy.
I love that. And I think that sometimes you're most receptive to what you've written and what you've said before. So, yeah, it's like a really beautiful kind of sentiment, and the words are really beautiful. But do you want to shout out any of your Instagram or anything to my free listeners?
Okay. We have more listens now. Me and my dog, who I've got beside.
Yes.
My Instagrams are chaotic. I used to try and do separate Instagrams for all my different things. Now I've realised that actually I'm allowed to just be one person who has loads of different interests, and that's fine. I'll kind of put myself into little boxes. So my Instagram is Poppy Eliza B, which is PoppyElizab. And then I do have a separate one for my journalism, which I think I will keep, which is Poppy Journo. So PoppyJourno. So yeah, I have those two different ones. And yeah, the Poppy Eliza B one is just poetry and ramblings, as you said at the beginning, mental health rambler, spoken word dabbler. And then the journalism one is more kind of, yeah, writing articles or interviews and that and whatnot.
Amazing.
TikTok is the same one as the first one, Poppy Eliza B. So feel free to check that out if you want to see someone rambling on about mental health, but hopefully in a good way.
No, amazing. Thank you very much for your time and for sharing so much. I think we'll definitely have to do a part 2 once you're all launched and everything, and to kind of speak more, because I think we could have spoken for ages. But yeah, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
It's okay. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for everybody for listening. There'll be resources in the podcast description, and yeah, take care, and I'll catch you in the next one. Once again, thank you so much for listening to Now We're Really Talking. If anything in this episode has brought up difficult feelings for you, please reach out for support. You don't have to go through it alone. If you're in the UK, you can contact Samaritans on 116 123, or contact Shout by texting 85258, or visit mind.org.uk for mental health support. If you're listening from outside the UK, you can find international helplines at findahelpline.com. Remember, there's always help out there, and talking about it is a strength, not a weakness.